I'm just gonna.
All right, I think we'll maybe get started.
Yeah, I think we're good. And as people enter the waiting room, I'll keep letting them in.
All right. So I just want to introduce Natalie Borsch, who is a local mom, an entrepreneur, and body confidence speaker. She's the owner of the Pink Studio, which is a body positive fitness and dance studio on the Danforth. Natalie is also a speaker who shares her tips and stories with corporate teams across Ontario and on the air as a body confidence expert on The Morning Show and The Social. Growing up in the competitive dance world, Natalie learned how dangerous the things we hear as children about our diets. Eating and bodies can shape your confidence and self-worth well into adulthood. Raising her own tween daughter, she is passionate about breaking that cycle and helping our children have healthy relationships with their own bodies. So thank you, Natalie. I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much for that lovely introduction. Thank you all for being here tonight or taking the time to watch the recording if you are watching this later. And I'm really excited. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I hope we can have an interactive discussion as well. So please feel free to type in the chat as much as you want. I'll keep an eye on it. So if you have any comments or questions sort of as they come up, we'll do a Q&A at the end, but you can unmute and ask a question or type it into the chat at any time. So thanks so much for having me. Like Valerie said, I'm studio and I speak on body positivity and body confidence, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. So today we're talking about raising a body confident and a body positive kid. And this is really, really important work. Our children have 4 times more likelihood of developing an eating disorder than they do of developing type 2 diabetes. And eating disorders are one of the deadliest mental illnesses and are starting to affect younger and younger children. So this is really important. What to me, raising a body positive child means is a child that is proud, that's confident, that has a positive body image. And body positivity in general, to boil it down, really means that we believe all bodies are good bodies. So that's how we want to get started. One of the biggest, most important things that I tell families that they can start with is the idea of decoupling health and weight. And that shift needs to happen for us first in your own head. Sometimes you need to sit with that before we can pass that on to our children. But it's really, really important because for most of us, we were raised in a time where those two things were completely intertwined. And also recognizing that for most of us in our generation, we were raised in a diet culture environment. And we were raised with, most of us, very outdated views on body image. So that being said, have compassion for yourself and have compassion for each other, because so much of this learning is unlearning. So much of it is unlearning some of the things that we were brought up to believe, and some of the myths around bodies, health, food, exercise that we were taught. And we all want our children to be healthy, but for a lot of time, the weight and health have been interchangeable and connected. And so the first real step within yourself and then within your family is trying to separate those things and decouple those things. Language is important, and we talk a lot about language because we all know that kids hear everything. Even when we don't think they're listening, they're listening. And, you know, even when they bring up something you said 3 weeks ago that you didn't think that they were listening. And even when they're watching TV and completely zoned out, they're still listening. So language is one of the biggest things. And it starts with the language that we use about ourselves. And raising a body positive kid essentially starts with you. It starts with us because I'm sure most of us have said things about our own bodies that we would never say about our children's bodies. And most of the negative things that we say, we think it is not as detrimental to be saying it about ourselves, but they are listening. And I'll give an example. I have a friend, she shared her story with me, and she grew up with a mother who was constantly saying how ugly she was. The mother, like self-deprecating on herself. Her whole life, she heard this from her mother. Her mother always felt ugly. She always said how ugly she was. She also grew up her whole life with other people telling her how much she looked like her mom. And so if we think about those two things she was hearing constantly in her childhood. One, you look like your mother. Two, the mother saying, oh, I'm so ugly. So that really impacted her for her entire life, and still, you know, to this day. And, you know, our kids are learning through us what is good, what's bad, what we think of as a good physical characteristic or a bad physical characteristic. If your body has changed in the last year during this pandemic, you are not alone at all. I, you know, speak with people every day who are navigating, you know, life in a new body that they don't feel comfortable in or they don't recognize. In the US, a study just came out that over 50% of adults have gained weight during the pandemic. So probably a similar statistic here in Canada. So if you have gained weight or your body has changed in the pandemic, you are not alone. And we're home 95% of the time. So try to catch yourself or be aware of comments that you are making about your own body changes that your children are listening to. Because if you are constantly complaining about the weight that you've gained or how much your body looks different, or like, oh, I'm so lazy, I need to get back to the gym, or my pants don't fit anymore. All of those things are deeply kind of confirming this message from the media that our children are also getting, that thin is valuable, that thinner is better, and that anything outside of that norm is bad. So yeah, I find that we talk about our own bodies in ways we would never, ever talk about our child's bodies. They're changing even faster than ours. They're growing very quickly. Their bodies are changing. We want to normalize bodies changing because them getting bigger is a good thing. Them growing and being bigger is good. That's what we want for our children. But if they're getting the message that bigger is bad, starts that
you are, this is for adults. You're not, I didn't.
I want a bag in here
That's fine.
right now.
And yes, feel free to ask questions. If you have, you can unmute and ask a question, or you can type it. And sorry, I lost my train of thought, but so starting with our own language about our own bodies and normalizing the changes that are happening all the time with our bodies. If you have an older child that's starting those tween, years, my 10-year-old is starting those, her body's changing and already starting to develop. So we really want to normalize that everyone's body changes. And if it looks different, that's okay. And even as an adult, if our bodies look different than they did a year ago going into lockdown, that's okay too. The other piece about language is talking about how we talk about other people's bodies or their bodies. And I have, sorry, 1 second. Just reading my notes and I lost my, but the talking about our own bodies, talking about their bodies, keeping the conversation as neutral as possible, and as curious as possible. So rather than something being good or bad, it's just question like, oh, did you notice this? Or did you notice that? My daughter was like playing and she's like looking at my hair and my armpits, and I, caught myself before I wanted to be like, oh yeah, I'm so lazy, I haven't shaved my armpits. And instead I was like, yeah, this is my body. Sometimes I feel like shaving it and sometimes I don't. And both are fine. There was, she had pimples for the first time this year with the mask wearing at school. I don't know if any of your children had, even changing multiple times throughout the day, there was just like little breakouts and things that were happening. And she was very, very self-conscious about it. So we started playing this game, where's the weirdest place you've ever got a pimple? Because for her, getting this pimple was she was so worried about it. And I wanted to normalize it because unfortunately reality is she's going to get a lot more. So she said, where's the weirdest place you've ever got a pimple? And she said, kneecap. I was like, yeah. Earlobe. And then I had one the other day. I said, look at this. Every time I get a pimple, look at this pimple on my earlobe. She says, have you ever got a pimple on your butt? Yes. We've all had pimples on our butts. Have you ever had a pimple in your eyebrow? Yeah, I've had a pimple in my eyebrow. I've had a pimple in my armpit. I've had a pimple. So, now when those pop up, instead of thinking something's wrong with my body, this is weird, she goes, guess where I just got a pimple? Look where I just got a pimple. You know, so normalizing those types of body changes, whether they're temporary changes like pimples or hair in some place and then not having hair, or whether they're more permanent and their body size changes or growing changes. We really just want to have open conversations all of the time. And the best way to lead those conversations is to make it about your body. So not saying, oh, I noticed that, you know, this is happening with your body, is make it about you. I noticed that, you know, I noticed that I have this pimple here. I noticed that my belly is, you know, this way. And, you know, starting those conversations where it's like changing all of the time. The other neutral terms is we try to have as neutral as possible language around food and exercise. So thinking again about what is the language that we use in our homes, in our households around exercise. Do you speak about it as a way to, you know, earn food, or as a way to work off food? Like, oh, we had pizza last night, better do our workout today. Again, decoupling those two things, decoupling food from exercise, so that there isn't this imaginary scale that needs to be balanced. Because that is often the groundwork for eating disorders. And growing up in the dance world, that was my life primarily, was this imaginary scale that I always had to balance. You know, okay, if I eat this, how many hours am I going to exercise later so that it balances itself again? That's an extreme example, but it's about, you know, not earning food. No one needs to earn the right to eat. You don't need to earn this by, you know, exercising and moving our bodies. We want to encourage exercise and movement for a plethora of reasons that have nothing to do with food. I run a fitness studio, so I'm every day encouraging people to exercise, but we never talk about, you know, food or weight, and we talk about how we exercise to sleep better. I mean, with the lockdown, I'm sure I'm not the only one whose kid is bouncing off the walls, and I'm like, you need to run around the block before I can even attempt to put you to bed. So whether that's for ourselves or our children, it's exercise for good sleep, for energy, for mood, so that everyone's happier, and endorphins, not because we need to negate anything that we've eaten. And the same with food. Is it's difficult to kind of reframe language around good foods and bad foods, but trying to get away from that and not label foods as good or bad because they don't have moral value. They're just food. And having a neutral, you know, approach to food. Some studies and some therapists, you know, a lot of them do say the more food rules there tend to be in a house, the higher risk there is that someone has an unhealthy relationship with food. So generally, I try to not have rules. Every family's different. You know what works for your children. There's also, allergies and things in play, but having rules, and having to clean your plate or having to finish your plate is often more detrimental than it is helpful, because children actually are very good at listening to their body cues. So children are naturally intuitive eaters and intuitive movers. They intuitively know when they want to move their body, and they know when they're full, and they know when they're hungry. So we were all born with very good intuition. And then over time, we have a lower capacity for listening to our own body cues because we've started to follow rules. So whatever rules we bought into when we were teenagers around food or exercise, we then learn to eat that way. We learn to eat based on, well, I know I shouldn't have this many carbs, or I know I shouldn't eat after this time, and so we lose the capacity to actually listen to our own body cues about, what am I craving right now? Am I hungry? Am I not? Because we've spent so many years unlearning those natural cues and eating and moving according to rules. Does that make sense? Has anyone had that experience as an adult where they're still in a certain mindset about something that because they learned that when they were 12, for example? Yeah. I'll share another little story about a friend's husband who shared a story with me. And when he was a kid, at every family event, every barbecue, and Christmas with the whole family, where you would set up sort of a buffet, he would go with the other kids and fill his plate, and inevitably, and he was a growing boy, inevitably somebody would always say, "Hey, Dougie, you gonna leave any for the rest of us?" Right? Very possibly innocent comment. He did develop an eating disorder that almost killed him. But to this day, even as a 40-year-old adult, he will always only go last in a buffet line now, because he doesn't trust his own judgment about what's an appropriate portion or how many people are behind me, and not from a manners point of view, but from a food relationship point of view, where he thinks someone's going to say that whatever he puts on his plate, someone's going to comment, is that, "Hey, you going to leave some for the rest of us?" And I'm sure as adults, if I asked everybody to just think of a time when they were a child or a teenager where someone made an off-the-cuff remark about their body, probably not, ill-intended. Decades later, you can probably still remember that. And whether it was said by a coach or a parent or a teacher, when we're young, those things stay with us and they impact our choices for years and decades. And there was a woman who, she can remember being 10 years old and riding with her dad in the car wearing shorts and we all know when we sit down in shorts, our thighs, you know, level out. And, you know, he just said like, oh, getting some tree trunks there, something about tree trunks. And that was the summer that she lost 20 pounds that she did not, you know, need to lose on a small frame, biked everywhere. And, you know, it stayed with her. And I think sometimes those offhanded comments, if you ever talk to the person years later, they wouldn't even remember, or they would be stunned that it stuck with you. So sometimes it's not the big stuff. It's those little language tweaks and how we're not seeing family right now, but when we go back to family gatherings, if you've made changes to your language within your own home, you may have to have those conversations with family members, you know, which I had to do with my own mom for her, and asked her not to make any comments about my daughter's body, positive or negative. I just didn't want to. Yes. Family members would say the thing. Yeah. So that's agreed, Megan. That is difficult, and it depends on the age of your child too. If you can have the conversation with your child, if they're old enough to understand, to have those nuanced conversations about, like, you know, what grandma said, you know, she didn't mean it in a bad way, but this is how I took it. If they're too little to have those conversations, it's really hard. And, you know, I would encourage you to start having the conversations with family members. But I understand family dynamics can be challenging. I also find my parents tend to get very defensive, because when I talk about these things, they think it's a reflection on their parenting. They take it personally as well, you know, because that's how we did it in the 80s. And I said, no, Mom, we were all raised in that, you know, diet culture. The next little piece is about media. As I'm sure, you know, you can all imagine, this is like books, YouTube. Yes, Erica? Can you unmute? I can't hear you.
Melissa, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, quick question. You hit a lot of things, and I have a lot of questions, but if I'm going to ask a couple, if it's okay, and feel free to save it to the end, one is to your point about the 80s culture. So I think of and obviously I hope everything on this call is confidential, but I think of grandparents, and both sets of grandparents are pretty obsessed with, and I only weigh this much today. And like, they're constantly like neurotically weighing themselves. So they might not be talking about our family, but they're clearly invested in, you know, their weight. And I've seen them make comments about other family members, not my family, but again, other family members. How do you have that conversation?
I would take it back to because for them, health and weight is that connected, right? Because that's what was, you know, drilled into them. And so I would approach it first from a like trying to educate point of view, as opposed to don't do that or make comments about people, but just say, when they say, oh, I only weigh this much, you know, I'm so happy that you are concerned about your health, and we want you to stay healthy for so many years. And I'm learning that weight isn't the best representation of that. Like, I love to see when you can like carry things in, and, you know, if they lift the grandchildren, like that is, you know, and you can say, I'm having this conversation with my doctor, and my doctor says it's, you know, more of a, as you age, what's the mobility? Can you, sit down on the ground and stand back up? Can they lift
Right.
their grandchildren and put them down? Can they put a bag of groceries? And the mobility is more of an indicator of your health than the scale is just a number, like, which all of those things. So I would try start it from that point of view so that
Right. Or maybe just
Um,
say, hey, like, I don't feel like I could change them at this age, but I could just say, hey, I don't want my kids to get a complex. So can we at least just don't share your number with me? Like, I feel like I know their numbers all the time. Like, don't
Yeah.
share your number with me when the kids are around. Like,
But them
it's a
sharing
badge of
that
honor for
number,
them.
and also knowing that them sharing that number for you is their way of saying, I'm healthy, I'm taking
Right.
care of myself.
Right.
That's what they're trying to say to you. It's just that because that's what they were told. This is
Right.
this is the number that represents how healthy you are.
It's just misguided. Yeah. And my
It's
other
just
question is,
misguided, but like that's what
Right.
they're trying to tell you. So then if you complement the actual healthy things that they're doing, yeah, and then say like, we are trying to have our children be raised in a body neutral environment.
and then thank you. And then my other question, and again, feel free to say, we'll save this to the end because I don't want to dominate, is you said about calling foods neutral. So I've heard like their JK class say like sometimes food or always food. I'm guilty of saying like, that's crap or that's junk food or there's no nutrition in that. I used to work for those companies. I know what's in them. Like, so how do you encourage them to eat the healthier food? Because if I don't say anything, they're just going to eat the bad stuff. I
Right.
think.
Yeah. I mean, with children, you do have to put limits. I would say I just don't, there's nothing that's completely off the table, because I know that if, something is never ever allowed, they will binge it as soon as they go to a friend's house.
Right.
So it's more about, for me, my hang up was pop. I was like, I never want my kids to drink pop. And for most of her life, she thinks pop is bubbly water, and goes to restaurant, orders soda. So recently, of course, she knew Coke was, and she said, can I taste it? And I didn't even want her to taste it, but I knew if I said no, it would elevate it into this forbidden food. So she tasted and said, that's good. So I try to not say things are good or bad. But you do have to restrict. I understand, like with kids, you do have to say, okay, you can have this many gummies and then the rest we're saving for the weekend. There's Zoodles and Captain Crunch. Yeah, all the things you probably weren't allowed to have in your house, right? I was not allowed sugary cereal either. So as soon as I went to college, it was all like Fruit Loops. And would you say you've already had XYZ today, so you can have that tomorrow? Yeah, I think I think it's okay to be like, this is, treats are allowed, but you're going to get a stomach, like I always say, you're going to get a tummy ache, or I don't want you to get a stomach ache, more so than I don't want you to eat more of this unhealthy food. Say, let's have a little bit. If you've already had this, you can have another one. Yeah, you can have another one tomorrow. Yeah,
Because
like
I say I like the rule. I mean, in a pandemic, it's kind of out the window. But like, hey, you can have one treat a day or 2 treats a day, or like, I use it kind of as money. Truthfully, like, fine, go have a treat. Like, get out of my hair. But yeah, I grew up in what you're describing, where everything was available all the time, and it's a wonder that I figured it out. But at the same time, I don't have that much faith in my kids to figure it out. I feel like I need to limit the number.
Yeah, you can, for sure, you can limit it. And I've started with this pandemic, we got into a routine of having dessert in the afternoon because she thinks that's like very cool. But it was for me because by the time she's had dinner, I don't ever want to do a treat late at night, not because of the sugar or calories or anything, but because of the sleep and the bed, you know, not wanting them to fight bedtime. So we started doing this like dessert in the afternoon, which feels very, you know, cool. And then so after dinner, you know, you can have as many snacks as you want, but they're not treats kind of
Thank
thing.
you.
Um,
I have a question to kind of piggyback on Erica's. Just about, you know, talking about food and the types of food that kids are eating. Like I feel like we've really tried to start changing the narrative on that because, like you said, I grew up in a house where it was that's junk food, that's okay. Like it was very regulated. So the way that we've been talking to our kids is more like protein gives you really good energy to last, and you know, leafy greens gives you a lot of vitamins that your body needs, and we kind of have been trying to break down food in that capacity. Like even sugar is one of those things. If they want a candy, it's yes, you can have this, but remember this kind of food gives you this kind of energy. Like, is that something that we should not be doing? Like, is that still
no,
many limits?
I think that's good. I mean, I would take it even one step farther, especially for those that have younger children and to like take it into, you know, we eat these like peppers because they give us good eyes, or like, you know, these carrots we eat carrots so we have strong eyes, or we eat you know, this food like protein for our bones, you know, so that, you know, even more specific, or like that's works really well with younger kids. If yours are older, the like protein, energy, that kind of stuff is good because it's also, you know, you do want to educate them around nutrition. So when they go off on their own, they have a basis, but it's, I guess, educating around yeah, always just trying to come back to that like as neutral as possible. And as I think when we talk about sugar and treats, you can start talking about it from like a mental health perspective too, because sometimes they say like, you know, the sugar, the treat, or the ice cream, like, you know, if we've had a bad day and everyone's cranky in the house of lockdown and we're going to go do a drive-through and get an ice cream, we've all had those days and that's okay. And sometimes they say like, this is like, or mommy's having this treat because, you know, for my mental health, you know, sometimes that's the sugar gives you energy for a short time. It also gives you stomach aches and you know, but sometimes it's also about the mental health or the social aspect of like going out for ice cream as a family is like a socially bonding event, you know what I mean? And that is good for family dynamics from a like mental health point of view, if that makes sense. We sometimes use the concept of rainbow plate. Yeah. That's good. Alarani, I love that. The rainbow plate and yeah, different colors. Asking kids what color foods they like to eat and then saying like orange foods are good for our brain and purple foods are good for our skin. And sorry to cut you off there, Emily. Does that make sense at all? It's hard. It's harder now than it ever was too, being at home and you're doing all the meals at home. You're not seeing anybody. So the joy is also gone for a lot of us, the joy in meal times. the joy in cooking. I get it. It's like non-existent right now. Oh, did you have a question, Megan? No, sorry.
Can I ask, sorry to interrupt, a
Mhm.
gender question with, I see a primarily female, perhaps female group, and no surprise. My husband and I had a discussion about, we have a daughter, about food-related discussions coming from him. Because I think,
Mm.
I don't know for the mums here, but that I think often it's the mothers who then are initiating and perhaps more controlling around food than the fathers in a heterosexual relationship. Not always, but I think I hear many more moms discuss food than dads. And so it was actually my husband who suggested, let's try a week of making no comments about food at all and letting her eat anything she wants. Let's see what happens. And it actually was surprisingly positive. That she actually made reasonable choices, and she's like, you know what, I think that was probably, you know, enough, whatever. And it was really relaxed and not as much of a challenge as I thought.
Mhm.
And sort of occasionally had dessert going right before bed, and the next day decided maybe I won't have 2 scoops of ice cream before going to bed.
Mhm.
That would be great. So anyway, I kind of have been trying to let go. Not that I'm that controlling, but sort of, you know what? Okay, there we go. And it was
Mhm.
really positive, and that more initiated from perhaps the male, so that if a daughter isn't always associating relationship with food with mom.
Mhm.
I don't know how
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thanks for sharing that, especially about the gender and the conversations around food and meals, and are they primarily coming from the woman in a heterosexual relationship? Because I think that you're right. And I think having your partner on board, if there is another partner in the household, is really important in all. You can carry it forward. You know, I share custody with my ex-husband, but it's been taken to the next level too, not just around food, but also like with periods. And we're having conversations with my daughter about periods. And I said, I really want you to have these conversations too. I want you to be involved. I want you to know exactly what she's using and what her questions are, so that it isn't just coming from, you know, me and her stepmom. Is coming from her dad too. But back to the food, I'm glad that less rules, you saw positive impact, because that won't work for everybody, but it surprisingly will work for more people than they think. I also said to my daughter with virtual school, I'm like, lunch is you now. You need to make your own lunch because I'm working, and you need to have, I just said, you know, have a vegetable, have a juice box, have a sandwich. But she also kind of liked the responsibility of it. So she would do it and then be like, is this okay? Or and it was a nice routine to start anyways, just to start being like, okay, you do your own lunches. And it doesn't, because it doesn't need to be a hot lunch. Whatever they want to find in the fridge and throw on a plate can work. And also, to be honest, like, and if there's a new food or something that I want to try, I snack plate when it's their TV time or screen time. Often works really well, because we all like to mindlessly eat in front of a screen. So I don't even announce like, oh, it's not, I just will put food in front when it's a screen. If she's on a screen, it's always like just vegetables and fruit, because she'll mindlessly eat it and not even realize then she just ate a whole plate of vegetables. And So to talk quickly about media for in terms of like YouTube, books, movies, TV. I think you're probably all aware and looking more at the diversity that our kids are watching all the time. And I encourage you to look at all diversity. So what representation is there, not just along race and gender, but also body representing disabled bodies versus is everyone in this TV show able-bodied? And then body size, if everyone represented has a thin body versus are there people in bigger bodies? And it's not about not letting our children watch something that isn't perfectly diverse. It's just about pointing it out. Like I'll sit down and say like, oh, looks like a really interesting TV show. Like, oh, did you notice that all the main characters are white? That's so interesting. So sometimes it's just about pointing it out and seeing the gaps in representation. I'm seeing so many more kids movies and kids TV shows on Netflix that have disabled bodies represented, which is amazing. So we talk a lot about that, and a lot more characters in larger bodies that aren't the villains. Because, if we look back at all the movies we watched in our childhood and those Disney movies, there were fat characters in the movies, and the fat characters were always the villains or the bad guys. So that's an interesting thing that you'll, notice. And it's about seeking out media that's diverse, but also just pointing out when it isn't and having those conversations. And now my daughter will right away, she'll be like, this movie looks cool, but it's all boys. I don't know if I want to watch it. Like, yeah, it's all boys, or and also LGBTQ, representation is also starting to watch more tween things now, that she's a bit older. And it's really nice to see in some of the newer shows like Babysitter's Club on Netflix is an example. Not the Babysitter's Club we grew up with, but I read all those books. They made a new Netflix show. And they're young kids, and they are not shying away from showing same-sex relationships and having conversations and having a kid who's trans as a character on the show. And so those kinds of things just are good to start conversations always. Like sometimes I'll just let her watch, and then the episode that had a trans character, I said, do you have questions about that? And we talked about it, because she said like, yeah, what does this mean? I don't understand, so yeah, body diversity in terms of everything. Dolls, if anyone's looking for plus size dolls, I can put in the chat. There's a doll company called Lamely Dolls, which are great if you want, if you have little ones and you're looking for dolls or gifts for little ones that you want, dolls that are, because it's hard to find different body size representation. I know there's a plus size Barbie. I have a problem calling her plus size Barbie because she's really not. And she really has still the same Kardashian proportions of a regular Barbie, just a little bit larger. So the the Lamely dolls are some of my favorites. The other fun thing, easy way to start conversations about bodies in media is filters, because kids love all the filters with Snapchat. You can put dog ears on and, all these cool filters that we have now. And it's a great way to start the conversation with your children about how easy it is to change how bodies look in the media. Because how quick is it to look and now you have dog ears on? So, knowing that the images that they are seeing on a billboard or a poster or a commercial or a magazine are really edited. See how this person's skin is all smooth, there's no pimples on it, and there's no bumps, and showing that with these filters that we can quickly change how our face looks with the filter. This is how they change what people's bodies look like in commercials, and how they alter bodies. And so comparing ourselves, again, we all grew up on these magazines and really thought that people looked like that. And even as adults, we're just still figuring out like, oh, that was Photoshop. There was a study that came out of Columbia that said after reading mainstream magazines, people, 85% of people, no matter what their body size was, felt worse about themselves. So 17 was a problem. Yeah. Insta filters. Yeah. 17 magazine. We grew up with that, and Cosmo, and, extremely problematic magazines. When my daughter was born, I made two really conscious decisions. One was to stop buying magazines. And the second one was to not ever say anything negative about my body in front of her. And the magazines was cold turkey. I'll be honest, half of the reason was money, because I realized I'm spending way too much money on these magazines, which I read in 10 minutes and then they're done. But I didn't want them around. And even when we think that we're mindlessly flipping, and even when we're aware that there's Photoshopped images in there, it still affects us. And if you do have mainstream magazines, it's like having those conversations with your kids, that not just girls, also the boys and all genders, that these bodies are altered just the way like we do in Snapchat. This is what they do for commercials. So yeah, I agree. Insta filters are way worse, like Valerie said. I even myself in my personal Instagram have tried to stop using filters as much, or at least the ones that change my skin tone or face shape. And they can be fun, and they can be a tool to educate as well, as long as we are realizing that that's not what people's skin looks like, not what people's face shape looks like. A lot of the magazines we grew up with, like the constantly diets that were thrown at us that, could probably list, I'm sure many of us have done, South Beach, Atkins, Weight Watchers, all of them. A huge part of the learning is unlearning. It's unlearning these beliefs that we have held as truth for a large part of our lives, and questioning those, or letting go of those, and those rules that we maybe have had. because essentially raising a body positive kid really starts with you. And it starts with, your own relationship with your body. And you do not need to love every inch of your body every day. That's not the goal. And a lot of households and families may identify more with body neutrality or body positivity. So both these are under the body acceptance umbrella. So I talk about body acceptance, and that really is body positivity and body neutrality. So body positivity is like all bodies are good bodies. I know I'm beautiful no matter what society says. Body neutrality is more, I am more than my body. Regardless of what I look like, that does not define my value or define my worth. So both are important. You don't have to pick a team. You can take bits from both and have times in your life where you fit more into a body positive mindset, and times when you fit more into a body neutrality mindset. Are there any questions about like media stuff and media exposure? Great. And
I'll say one thing, like, so Dove just released their most recent ad where it's like a 14-year-old girl who posts a picture that's, filtered out to the nines, and then it kind of deconstructs that into being like who she is. So like there are campaigns out there who I feel like Dove has, for a long time, for a good decade at least, has been trying to like do this body positivity thing and not worry too much about, teaching women and girls to love the bodies that they have and that they're in. But I don't know. I mean, my kids are young, but my daughter's already saying things and it's like, what? But how do you, it's just so different now, right? Like it's so in your face, in the kids' face with social media and Instagram filters. And like, it's so different than when we grew up. Like, how do we really talk to them about that? Like, how do we really be like, but that's not real, right? Like, that's not what, like, how do we talk to them about what beauty is?
mm-hmm.
That's something that they will have like thrown at them all the time, is what beauty is and a concept of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was more obvious when we were kids what beauty was.
Yeah.
But it's more in their face now. I don't know how to explain it.
I know what you're saying. And it's also the prioritizing of beauty as well. So it's also, our kids are learning very young that beauty is held to a high standard. And if you are, which is why I say, like, don't make, family don't make comments about my daughter's body, good or bad, because people say, but I'm telling her she's beautiful, or like, she looks great. It's also reinforcing the idea that beauty, it holds value. And as long as they are a socially acceptable standard of beauty, that has virtue and that has value. So yeah, talking about beauty, but also in a way of like it not making it into a bigger thing than it is, so it doesn't hold the power that it does, unfortunately, in society. And but I think even just that you're aware of all of those things, you're aware of those commercials, and getting your kids' thoughts on it. Like, we all have times that our kids open up to us. Sometimes it's in the car, so it's like, let's go on a long drive, and they'll get talking. Sometimes for my daughter, she still allows me to be in the bathroom with her while she's in the tub. And she opens up a lot during the bath, probably because there's no distractions. So I don't pressure her to have conversations about, what did you think about that? Or how was your day at school, even in the moment, because she just doesn't want to talk. But later, I know in the bathtub, it'll be relaxed and, she'll open up and you can say, remember that commercial we saw with the Dove and they had the girl who had all the filters on and then they took the filters off? Like, that was interesting, huh? Like, I've never seen that before. What did you think about that? And then it just sort of starts and you might get there like, that was weird, or that was cool, or why did they even, if they're like, why did they do it? That's a great way to start. Well, because, often like we're not photographers, we don't work at magazines, and we don't know that they do all of these things. So they're trying to show all the things that get done to this model's image before it gets printed. So sometimes I just think bringing up a topic and casually, like, interesting, what did you think, will get you at least even some way of how much is it even on their radar? Did it affect them? Did they not even, are they too young to even understand? Or, yeah, the questions.
I don't know if this got covered already. It's Meredith here. Because I joined a bit late, so sorry about that. But I was wondering how you handle, if you already talked about this, just say dealt with, watch the video. But dealing with body positive and fat positive words, and showing like, I'm proud of my body and it jiggles and that's great and that's a good thing, and showing them that. But then also the fact that my kids do hear at school and everywhere in the media, certain body words being used as weapons. Things like calling someone fat is meant to be an insult very often, and it's using it as a weapon. So I try to talk to the kids about, how, although, being fat or thin, or those are just states of being, and that's okay, and all bodies are good bodies. But then they do hear those types of words being weaponized, and how do we, other than talking to kids about that, how do we show them that it's not okay to weaponize words, but then, they know that certain words about body size are meant to hurt people and therefore carry in our society that negative meaning. Sorry, that wasn't very articulate, sorry.
No, I understand what you mean. And, even the word fat is, it's still difficult to navigate that with children, because it's difficult to navigate it with adults. There's a lot of, people living in bigger bodies who fat is just a descriptor word. That's how I feel. It's just a describing word. It is a neutral word, but we know in society it's not neutral. It has a very negative connotation. And there are people who are fat who would be upset with that language, and others who wouldn't. So even it's it's difficult to, I think, exactly what you're doing, explaining, depending on the age of your kids, explaining that it is just a descriptive word, like tall, short, fat, thin, but knowing like there's a history to this word. There's a history because we live in a very fat phobic society where people who are fat are still treated poorly, and there's a lot of weight stigma in the medical community still. So sorry to not give you a great answer, Meredith, because I think what you're doing is great in just all you can do is show them the complexity of language and show them that, you know, often these words aren't, you know, are just describing words. But if someone's using it in a mean way on the playground, you know, they're also just thinking of the easiest word they can think of to hurt someone. That's what the word fat is often. It's just the easiest word, the quickest word that comes to, you know, kids' minds if they don't know, you know, other language. But I think what you're doing is great.
I think your point is a good one too, that like not to necessarily be afraid of going into the history of, you know, fat bodies and different sized bodies have not always been and still are not always accepted, and we should. And, you know, because I talked to them about that in terms of racism and sexism and everything. And, you know, we talk about bodies and that weaponization, but I think I can probably be a little bit more explicit about the acceptance and non-acceptance of bodies in our society.
Yeah, I think the conversations that, you know, are having around privilege and is really acknowledging and starting to talk with our children with all the places that we hold privilege. So, you know, if you are a thin person having thin privilege and what that means that, you know, you can say to your child, being thin privilege means that my whole life I've been able to go to the doctor. And if I said something was hurting me or I didn't feel right, they did the right tests and listened to me and figured out the problem. But sometimes people in bigger bodies go to the doctor with the same symptoms and they're not listened to, you know, and that's an example of thin privilege, and saying all the, you know, how we can, the different ways that we hold privilege, even as, you know, as an able-bodied person. Are there disabled kids in their school, and talking about all of the privileges that we hold as able-bodied, or heterosexual privilege, that you can go out with your partner and hold hands through the park and you never think about that. You never, you know, and I say your Uncle Brian and your Uncle Grant, sometimes they're in certain places where they choose not to hold hands, and this is why. So just kind of those conversations that we're all having around racism and around gender. And the schools are great about International Girls' Day and Women's Day, and she comes home with all these facts about, you know, gender inequality, which are awesome, and taking it, you know, taking it farther into, you know, not just white privilege and male privilege, but also able-bodied and thin and, you know, cisgendered or heterosexual. Karen, did you have a question?
Me?
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh no. Okay, sorry.
I just jumped in at the last minute. Sorry.
Speaking of doctors, just some of my quick notes around like quick tips is finding a body positive doctor. So if that is something that, if you do have a family doctor now, if that's a conversation that you want to have as your kids are growing up and their bodies are changing, or seeking out a different doctor, because, you know, and I know what it's like just trying to find a family doctor in Toronto. So I know sometimes it's just like you're happy to get a family doctor, let alone interview them. But my daughter's getting older, and I was starting to think about, okay, in the next few years, if she wants to go in to see the doctor ever by herself without me in the room, am I comfortable that that doctor has the same values that I do? And am I comfortable with the advice that they would, you know, give? And ultimately the answer was no. So I found a new family doctor this year, and that was my priority. And we had very, all over Zoom, because this is now how you meet doctors and have virtual appointments, but told her, you know, asked her about her thoughts on, you know, body positivity and body acceptance, and that that's something that's really important to me in a doctor. And the other little tip always is just, you know, anything that you can encourage your kids to find their passion, because feeling body confident and positive will always help if they are passionate and involved in something. Doesn't any you know, activity or sport or something that just makes them feel good about themselves, that makes them feel like whether it's they're feeling good because they're with all their friends and they're playing soccer in a post-COVID world, or they're they really like the game chess and they're really good at it, and you encourage that, and that's their, you know, passion. And I would encourage everyone as parents, if you do have social media, to try and diversify your own social media as much as possible and learn from all of the wonderful people that are out there, because I'm still learning all of the time. And it's helped me so much to be following educational accounts and influencer accounts of people who have not had the same experience as me. So, you know, a lot of disabled influencers now I follow, and I'm just learning so much about the disabled community and about my own privilege as an able-bodied person. And, you know, following accounts of people that have different bodies than you and are, you know, educating on body size. The body positivity movement really belongs to queer, fat Black women. They are the creators of this, and you know, we are just trying to learn from them and trying to not hijack the movement, because it has been a little bit hijacked in recent years. But you know, learning from those people. And the easiest way I find is, if you are on social media, is just completely diversifying your feed, because you are 100% in charge of your own algorithm. The algorithm is not against you. You're in charge of it. So show it what you want to see. Yes, Karen?
I realized I did have one question, and maybe you guys have already talked about it while I was learning to be a good parent in my other meeting. So I am not struggling, but dealing with the fact that my daughter is 11 and she wants to wear more, like she wants to kind of show off her strong, healthy body. And so she wants to wear she likes to wear a little sports bra, but then she likes to wear her shirt open out. And my husband really struggles with that, because he wants her, you know, he doesn't want her to show off her body. And I think I never want her to feel shamed about what she wears. I never want her to feel judged or shamed about anything that she wears. I want her to feel 100% confident in anything she walks out the door wearing. But on the other hand, you also have to take into account this idea of like, as a woman, I know that I absolutely know it is not my fault that when I walk down the street, if a man whistles at me or whatever, I know that that's not my fault, but I do know that if I, lately in my COVID sweats, not getting nearly as much of a reaction as I used to when I would bike along in my bike shorts. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I really struggle with this whole thing of where I'm wanting to raise a girl who is proud of herself and proud that she's physical and athletic and she can do stuff and she can, but on the other hand, I don't want her to walk out the door and feel vulnerable, maybe. I guess I don't want that. And I want to know how to talk to my husband about it so that he doesn't do any inadvertent body shaming to her. So anyway, there's my conversation opener. Maybe you guys have talked about this already.
Yeah, it's a huge one, and it's a very emotional one too. And you know, I'm sure everybody on this call could have their own stories about this, and it's very it is very emotional and very triggering. And I think in terms of your husband, it's like really unpacking where those feelings are going. And I would, you know, encourage you to do what you're doing and keep challenging that, keep challenging where that's coming from and who the responsibility lies with, right? Because that's what it sounds like you're trying to teach your daughter. The responsibility is not hers to how she is maybe seen or catcalled.
Exactly.
That's not our responsibility. It is theirs. But will that stop it from happening? No. So how can you arm her with information to help her understand that if that happens, where it's coming from? Because I remember the first time I was catcalled, I was extremely young and I didn't even understand what the words meant. Like I had to ask my mom, what does this mean?
Yeah.
It's hard to challenge dad's ideas of sexualizing girls via their clothing. It is.
It is. And again, my question has, I totally get that my question has no easy answers. I just think it's an interesting thing to discuss in this context.
It is. And I think a lot of men maybe haven't had those conversations with their partner until they maybe have a daughter that is of a certain age. And then you almost are questioning, why do I have a reaction that she's walking in a sports bra, that she wants to go to her soccer practice in a sports bra? And it's like catching those reactions in ourselves because we all have internalized bias. I catch my own internalized misogyny all the time, calling myself out on it. You know, I catch my own internalized fat phobia all the time. So sometimes it's like questioning that and like, you know, yeah, having those conversations. I think it's difficult. I think it's, there's maybe an ownership over our daughters' bodies that we don't have as much of over our sons' bodies. And that is, why do we feel a sense of ownership over their body when it does not belong to us? It's theirs.
For me, and again, it could be an age thing, what I notice is that my daughter is thinking about her body and thinking about how she presents it and how it looks and how it moves, all in a positive way. So that far, thank God. But she's thinking about it and kind of being in a space more physically than my son, and he's 2 years younger. Couldn't care less. Today, his pants were too short and his sleeves were up to here. He just was completely oblivious. No idea. And maybe that will change, but I find that an interesting thing, how that's starting to happen with her. And I wonder whether it's an age thing or a female thing. I know there's a lot of that happening within her friend group where people have made comments about stuff that she wears, so it's a hard, the 11 seems to be pretty
tough. Yeah, it is a gender thing too. I think we also underestimate the influence we have as parents on little ones. You know, if we have how much more okay we are with letting little boys run out the door with their t-shirt on backwards and pants that are too short and their hair not brushed and looking like a cute little raggedy muffin, and how we're more aware of when our girls go out looking a little disheveled and how that presents, right? And we're more, so it could also be from even younger, she's already learned that this is important, because we've already layered that, you know, that this is important, how you look and how you present.
Well, I had a very strict talk with my in-laws years and years ago when my daughter would go to my in-laws for one night and one day to stay with my mother-in-law when my husband was working in Niagara. And I noticed after a couple of months of this, she was asking me, do I look cute in this? Do I look cute? And I thought, whoa, we are. And I realized it was my mother-in-law and her friends. Like, she would kind of show off my daughter to her friends. And there was a lot of this blonde, blue-eyed, cute girl type of, oh, you look so cute. You look so. So I banned all compliments based on
appearance.
Nothing. You're not allowed to. And I was ruthless. I'm sure I was horrible. I don't care. Whatever. I just said nothing. You're allowed to say, you look ready for the weather. You look ready for a party. You look ready to have fun. You look like you put a lot of care into your outfit. Those things are fine. Don't tell her she's cute. Don't tell her. I was so mad. So I've tried to play with this for a long time. Yeah. Sorry.
I think your instincts were right. And sometimes it takes an extreme reaction to be able to get to a happy medium. Sometimes you do have to be extreme. And that goes with our own language too, of like, you know, when I'm like, I said to myself, I'm never going to say anything negative about the way that I look in front of my daughter ever. And it's like, that's, you know, but sometimes you have to take it that far just to be aware of how often you have an instinct to do that. So sometimes with family, that is the only way, is to be extreme about it at birth, is to start by being extreme about it. And then over the years it will settle and dial back. Just before we go, I just want to read a question quickly because it was sent in anonymously. My 6-year-old girl has recently started saying she's ugly and gross and her body's dumb, and she wouldn't stop gouging at her leg with a pencil. We were in the middle of discussion about her cursing out her brother, so was she just deflecting? I don't know. Not knowing if there's truly something behind those words or actions, or was she just trying to find a way out of the consequence of swearing in the moment? I just wanted to say that it's the biggest thing is if you hear it again, like if those words come up again and if it's repeated, you know, negatively, that my body's ugly, I'm ugly, my body's dumb, then it is a problem as opposed to something that was deflecting, said in the moment. Also, those words sound so heartbreaking and harsh to us, but also just remembering that that's the language of a 6-year-old. So them saying their body's gross is in line with the language that they have, and they may not mean, so trying to find out what is behind the word gross, because she obviously heard it somewhere. So she's, it may not mean what we think gross means. It may be, you know, so trying to dig into what makes you feel gross? What do you think is gross about your body? Because it may come out as something totally different. It may come out as their body looks different than their best friend in these ways. But the language that they had in the moment was gross or ugly. But asking open-ended questions in times that you know traditionally they might be open to talking, so not like right after school ends, and asking non-judgmental questions, like from an interested point of view, like tell me, like what does your body do that makes you think it's gross, you know, and from a really interested point of view, not from a like judgmental or from an instantly disagreeing with them, like no, your body is perfect, like trying to dig into where they get those words from. Yeah, any other questions? I'll quickly just, I know we all have to go, and I'll just quickly, we didn't dive too much into the power posing, but this is such a fun activity to do with your kids. And it's something that my dad did with me when I was younger, and it's helped me a lot in my life. And then as an adult, I've just researched so much of the science behind power posing because it's so fascinating to me. And there's a famous TED Talk on it. So just Google TED Talk power posing, and she gives you all the science behind it. But it's fun with kids because it's literally like superhero pose. So the idea behind power posing is if we hold a high power pose for 2 minutes, it makes us feel more confident, and it literally alters your body chemistry. So your testosterone rises by 20% and your cortisol levels lower by 25%. So, and they've proven this by doing like saliva swabs. So the neat thing is, you know, if they're nervous about something and like, or you just want them to feel, you know, good about your bodies. The great thing about power posing is it's about taking up as much space as possible. And for most of us, it feels uncomfortable because we've spent our lives trying to shrink ourselves and to take up less space. So to make your body as big as possible and stand like Superman, you know, with your legs spread and your arms like this and your chin up like Wonder Woman. The idea is just to make yourself as big as possible. The body chemistry changes, and the surge of, you know, testosterone you're going to feel and the surge of confidence, yes, it's temporary, of course, but when you do this consistently, you begin to be able to tap into it really quick. So, you know, I power pose in bathroom stalls, I think before every job interview that I've had, or every time I go on television, I, you know, quickly go to the bathroom and stand in my Wonder Woman pose in the bathroom stall. You know, so anytime your kid's feeling down on themselves or they're nervous about a test or a soccer game, say Wonder Woman pose, let's go, or Superman pose, and you look and feel ridiculous. That's the point. It should be super exaggerated. You know, when you're doing it before a presentation at work or something for yourself, you'll also notice that, If you do it super exaggerated for 2 minutes, then when you relax into your regular state, you're still going to be a lot more lifted and in like better posture than you were before. So that's just a little fun hack that you can use for yourselves, and you can use it with your kids just for fun. And if you're interested, you can watch and read about there's lots of videos on the science behind it. And if your kids are old enough, they might be interested in the science behind it too, and the studies that have been done. And yeah, does anybody else have any questions about anything? Alarani, I like your comments about the dancers and movement that brings you joy is really important. You know, encouraging our kids to do movement that brings them joy, not because, you know, it's the thing that they're best at or it's the thing that they're good at. That puts a lot of pressure, but what brings you joy? And that's what we do at my studio. We do adult beginner dance classes. So it's a lot of, you know, people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s doing hip hop for the first time and doing ballet for the first time. And it's very joyful.
That's great. Well, I will say thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate you being able to come, and I will watch the beginning of the session at my leisure because I know we recorded it. So we'll share it with those who could not make it this evening. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. For everybody who did come, Eastview is offering a few little treats. Like I think they have some yoga mats, they have some basketballs. If anybody would like to, you know, claim a thank you for coming, do something fun with your body prize. You can, yeah, I'll write my email address in the chat for those of you guys who don't have it already. And you can email me and we'll arrange to make sure that you can get your prize from Eastview, either from them directly or some other way as it happens. So yeah, I think they have, like I said, yoga mats, basketballs, maybe I think a Bluetooth speaker she might have even mentioned. So stuff to keep you active during COVID. But thank you so much, Natalie. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. I also forgot to mention, there's a link in the chat for a whole list of body positive books for all genders and all ages. If you are interested in that, it's on Indigo just because that's the easiest place to make a wish list, but you can order from anywhere. It's really helpful to have books, I find.
Yeah, I shared that with our partner schools and with Eastview, and I actually also shared it with our school librarians. So I think that's a really great resource for us to have. Thank you.
Thanks
All right,
so
well,
much.
thank you guys so much. It was lovely to have everybody join us. And in about a month, it'll be intuitive eating, how to deal with picky eaters and how to have a good relationship with food. So that's our last Wednesday wellness night. So thank you, Natalie, and thank you to everybody for coming.
And I will just quickly say that tomorrow I hope you all
yes.
that's for 13 Moons, which is our first of 3, I'm hoping, workshops on Indigenous teachings and learnings. Luana Shirt will be with us to tell us a bit more about the Indigenous cultural perspective. Okay.
That's great. All right. Thank you guys. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you.